I was 34 years old the day we buried my father, and for most of my life, I thought I understood who he was. To me, he had always been a quiet, unshakable presence, a man of strong hands, stern rules, and rare smiles. He wasn't the kind of dad who played catch in the yard or told bedtime stories, but he paid the bills, kept the ranch running, and made sure food was on the table. Growing up, I learned not to expect warmth from him, only discipline. And still a part of me respected that. I believed he was the foundation of our family, the one who carried the weight when no one else could. That illusion shattered the day of his funeral. The church was heavy with the scent of lilies and candle wax, every pew filled with faces I half recognized from childhood neighbors, old co-workers, distant cousins. Some bowed their heads respectfully, others whispered with a sharpness I couldn't ignore. There was a strange undercurrent in the room, as if the grief wasn't universal, as if half the people had come not to mourn him, but to make sure he was really gone. I noticed the cold looks, the muttered words, but I pushed them aside, telling myself funerals made people strange. My mother sat beside me dressed in black lace, her gloved hands gripping her purse so tightly the leather squeaked. Her eyes didn't weep the way mine did. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, like she was holding back something volcanic. For hours she stayed that way, through the hymns, through the pastor's hollow word about a man of integrity, through the procession to the graveside. She was stone. It wasn't until the last shovel of dirt fell over his coffin that she finally turned to me. Her voice was low, almost drowned by the wind, but her words cleaved through me. "You should know the truth. Your father wasn't who you think he was. There's a reason so many people here hate him." I stared at her, confused, my chest tightening with dread. The way she said it, it wasn't bitterness, it wasn't spite. It was something heavier, a release of something she had carried for decades. That night, after the relatives cleared out and the house fell quiet, she sat me down at the kitchen table. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey, though I'd never seen her drink in her life. Her hands trembled as she set one in front of me, and then she began to speak. She told me things that made my stomach turn, stories so vile I could hardly process them at first. She said my father wasn't just strict, he was cruel, calculating, manipulative. That behind the walls of our house he controlled her with fear, silenced her with threats, and wore his charm in public like a mask. She said he had enemies for reasons I never understood as a child. Half the town despised him because he ruined lives quietly, methodically, through debts, deals, betrayals that left families broken. And the reason she stayed, she said, was because he made her believe she had no choice. I felt myself unraveling with every word. I wanted to defend him, to cling to the version of the man I thought I knew, but the truth was gnawing inside me. Memories surfaced, moments I had buried. The bruises on her arms she explained away as accidents. The way neighbors stopped visiting us without reason. The times I heard my father's voice through the walls, sharp and cruel, followed by my mother's silence. By midnight I was shaking. I didn't know whether to scream or collapse. My father was in the ground, and yet it felt like he had just destroyed me all over again. And the worst part, my mother wasn't done. She leaned closer, her eyes wet now, and whispered, "There's something else you need to know. Something he made sure you'd never find out." My heart pounded so violently it hurt. I begged her to tell me. She took a long, shaky breath, and when she finally spoke, the words shattered my entire identity. She told me I wasn't my father's child. For a moment, I thought I misheard her. My whole body went numb, like the blood drained straight out of me. But she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto mine, trembling, but steady enough to let me know she wasn't lying. She said my father always knew, and that was why he treated me differently from my sister. Why there was always that invisible wall between us. He hadn't raised me out of love or duty. He'd kept me under his roof, as punishment, a living reminder of her betrayal. I demanded she explain, but my voice came out more like a whisper than a shout. My mother reached across the table, her hand shaking over mine. She said when she was young, before marriage, she had fallen deeply in love with another man. A man who was kind, gentle, and everything my father wasn't. She had gotten pregnant with me before she was forced into marriage with my father, pressured by her own family into what they thought was a respectable match. My biological father never got the chance to raise me. My father, the man in the coffin, found out on their wedding night, and from that day forward I was nothing but leverage in his game of control. Every harsh word, every cold stare, every withheld scrap of affection suddenly had context. He hadn't just been distant. He had despised me. And the cruelty my mother endured, it wasn't just about breaking her spirit. It was about reminding her every single day of the mistake she made in loving someone else. The room spun. I wanted to deny it, to say she was making it up out of grief or bitterness, but deep down I knew it was true. I remembered how he never once said he was proud of me, not even when I graduated with honors, or when I saved the ranch's finances during a drought. I remembered how he favored my sister, showering her with the little warmth he could muster, while I got only silence. I asked about my real father. Who was he? Did he know about me? My mother broke, then her face crumbling as tears streamed down. She said he had tried. He had written letters, he had knocked on doors, he had begged to see me. But my father, her husband, had made sure none of it reached me. He burned the letters. He threatened her family. He used his influence in town to ruin the man's reputation until he left in shame. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, my real father had disappeared. She didn't even know if he was still alive. Anger surged inside me like wildfire. I felt robbed not just of a father, but of an entire life that might have been. I thought of all the nights I lay awake wondering why my father didn't love me. All those times I blamed myself, thinking I wasn't good enough, when the truth was, he had hated me from the moment I drew breath. And my mother. God, I loved her. But I couldn't understand how she let it happen, how she let him bury the truth for so long. She reached for me again, but I pulled back. I couldn't even look at her. My whole life felt like a lie, every memory tainted, every achievement meaningless under the shadow of his cruelty. I stumbled out of the kitchen into the night air, gasping for breath like I was drowning. The stars blurred above me as I realized I wasn't grieving my father anymore. I was grieving myself, the child who never had a chance to know love from the one person who should have given it freely. And just when I thought the weight of it all might crush me, my mother's voice carried softly through the doorway. "There's more," she said. "Something you'll find in his study. He kept it locked, but I know where the key is." I didn't sleep that night. My mind thrashed like a storm-tossed sea caught between rage, grief, and a sickening curiosity about what my mother meant. By dawn, I found myself standing outside my father's study, the one room in the house he never allowed anyone else to enter. Growing up, I'd been punished once just for turning the doorknob. Now, with trembling fingers, I held the small brass key my mother had pressed into my palm. The door creaked as it opened, releasing the stale smell of tobacco and dust. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, cutting the room into harsh stripes of shadow and light. His desk sat at the center like a throne stacked with ledgers, papers, and a locked drawer that practically hummed with secrets. My hands shook as I forced the drawer open. Inside were bundles of envelopes brittle with age, tied with twine. My heart stopped when I saw the handwriting. It wasn't my father's. It was delicate, careful, and achingly familiar, even though I had never seen it before my real father's. Dozens of letters, all addressed to me. I pulled one free and unfolded it with shaking fingers. The words swam before my eyes. "My dearest child, I don't know if these letters will ever reach you, but I need you to know I love you. From the moment I learned you existed, you became my world. I've fought every day to be near you, but your mother's husband has built walls I cannot climb. If you never know me, please never doubt this. None of this is your fault. You are worthy of love, and one day, I hope you will find it in abundance." Tears blurred the ink until I could hardly read. I opened another and another. They were full of hope, despair dreams of meeting me, stories of a life he wanted to share, holidays, birthdays, even small details about the songs he loved or the tree he planted in his yard the year I was born. He wrote them all for me, year after year, never giving up, even as my father intercepted and buried them here like corpses in a drawer. I sank to the floor, clutching the letters to my chest, shaking with sobs that racked my body. The weight of stolen years crushed me. My father, no, the man in that grave hadn't just hated me. He had stolen the only chance I had to know the man who truly loved me. I don't know how long I sat there drowning in grief, but eventually, I noticed something else in the drawer. A thin black ledger, the edges frayed, the leather cracked. I flipped it open and froze. Inside were names, dozens of them, written in neat columns alongside numbers. Some had notes scribbled in the margins. Foreclosed debt settled, ruined. These weren't simple records. They were trophies. Proof of every family he had destroyed, every person in town he had crushed under his boot. Suddenly it all made sense, the whispers at the funeral, the sharp looks, the bitterness that hung in the air like smoke. My father hadn't been a respected man. He had been feared, despised. And I had lived my whole life under his roof, believing his silence toward me was indifference, when in reality, it was contempt. But what cut deepest wasn't his hatred. It was the knowledge that my true father had fought for me and I had been kept blind. That ledger and those letters weren't just relics. They were the blueprint of a legacy poisoned by cruelty and a love stolen by force. When I finally emerged from the study, clutching the letters, my mother was waiting in the hall. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, as if she had already guessed what I had found. She whispered, "Now you know why half this town hated him, and why I could never leave. He controlled everything, every debt, every secret, every life, including ours." I stared at her, broken but burning with something new, something fierce. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He was dead, and I was alive. I had his secrets, his proof, his sins in my hands, and for the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of power. Power is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in like the first sliver of dawn breaking the dark. As I sat at the kitchen table later that day, the letters spread before me like fragile ghosts, I felt something shift inside. For 34 years, I had been the silent child, the overlooked shadow in my own home. My father's cruelty had carved me into someone small, someone who believed that enduring was the same as surviving. But now, with his ledger of sins and my real father's stolen love in my hands, I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. I could finally choose what to do with the truth. At first, anger consumed me. I wanted to march into town and fling that ledger into the middle of Main Street to shout my father's name from the rooftops and watch the people who once bowed their heads in fear spit on his memory. I wanted revenge for myself, for my mother, for the man who had written me all those letters begging for a chance to love me. But anger alone can burn a person hollow, and after the fire came the ache, the unbearable grief of realizing the man I longed for may still be out there, or he may be long gone buried without me ever knowing his face. I asked my mother where he was now, if she had any idea what became of him. She shook her head, shame twisting her features. "He left after your father ruined him," she whispered. "I heard rumors he moved to another state, tried to rebuild. But I was never allowed to know more. I was too afraid to look." Her voice cracked, and for the first time I saw not just the woman who raised me, but the prisoner she had been trapped in the web my father spun. I wanted to hate her for her silence, for letting me grow up in the shadow of a lie. But the truth was, I couldn't. I saw her trembling hands of her hollow eyes, and I realized she had been surviving just like me. Maybe she hadn't done enough. Maybe she'd chosen fear over freedom. But she had kept that key. She had told me the truth at last, even if it came too late. In the weeks that followed, I carried those letters everywhere, tucked close to my chest like armor. I read them over and over, memorizing the words of a man who had loved me from afar. I started noticing things in town, too. Neighbors who looked at me differently now that my father was gone, as if they could finally separate me from him. I heard whispers about unpaid debts, about properties he had stolen, about people who lost everything because of him. The ledger was proof, but the town already knew. They had just been too afraid to speak while he lived. And then one night, as I sat by the fire, a thought struck me so sharply it left me breathless. What if I used the ledger to undo what he had done? What if I returned, the land forgave the debts, gave back what he had taken? Would it cleanse his memory? Would it free me from his shadow? Or would it just paint another target on my back, a reminder that I was his blood, after all? I didn't know, but I did know this: I couldn't live with silence anymore. I couldn't keep pretending his cruelty died with him. My father had left behind more than a ranch and a tarnished name. He had left me with a choice to bury the truth like he did, or to drag it into the light no matter how much it burned. I looked at my mother that night, sitting across from me, weary and waiting. For the first time, I said it out loud. He doesn't get the last word. I do. And I meant it. Once I said those words, there was no going back. Something inside me hardened, not into cruelty, but into resolve. My father had built his life on silence, intimidation, and control. If I was ever going to free myself and my mother, I had to do the opposite. I had to speak. The first step was terrifying. I chose a town council meeting, a place where voices carried and records were kept. I walked in clutching that black ledger, my palms slick with sweat, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. People turned as I entered. Some faces looked curious, some wary, and a few openly hostile. My father's shadow was still thick in that room, even though he was gone. When my turn came, I stood. My voice shook at first, but once I opened the ledger and read the first name aloud, something shifted. I spoke of the families ruined by his schemes, the debts he had engineered only to seize land and property, the lies he told to enrich himself while others starved. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people shouted, some in anger, some in vindication. I kept going, page after page, until my throat was raw. By the time I closed the ledger, the room was buzzing like a hive shaken from slumber. That night changed everything. Some people praised me for speaking the truth, for finally unmasking the man they feared. Others looked at me with suspicion, as though his sins lived in my blood and would bloom in time. But I didn't care. I had carried shame and silence long enough. If they wanted to see me as his child, then let them also see the proof that I wasn't like him. What I didn't expect was what came 2 days later: a knock at my door. A man stood there, weathered and gray, his hands twisting a worn cap. His eyes met mine with a trembling kind of hope. "Are you Elizabeth?" he asked, using the full name my father never spoke. My heart clenched. He introduced himself as Daniel, my real father. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked older than I imagined, his face carved by grief and years of hard living. But when he smiled, a hesitant, trembling smile, I saw it. The resemblance. The warmth I had been starved for all my life. He explained that he had left town long ago after my father destroyed his reputation, but he never stopped watching from a distance, never stopped wondering what became of me. When he heard I had spoken publicly against my father, when he heard about the ledger, he realized the truth was finally free. That was when he found the courage to come back. I wanted to collapse into his arms, to scream at him for not fighting harder, to thank him for every letter I'd read. All of it churned inside me at once. Instead, I led him into the kitchen where my mother waited. The moment her eyes met his, decades of silence cracked wide open. She cried harder than I'd ever seen, and he held her like a man who had never stopped loving her. For the first time, I felt something bloom in my chest, something I'd never felt in that house before. Not fear, not resentment. It was love, fragile but real, finally allowed to breathe. Still, life was not a fairy tale. The town remained divided, some forgiving, some suspicious. My sister barely spoke to me, furious that I'd dragged the family name through the mud. But I knew I had chosen the only path that was truly mine. Because I understood something now: revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like breaking a cycle. Sometimes it's living the life they swore you couldn't. And as I sat with my mother and the father I had always deserved, I realized my story wasn't about the man in the grave anymore. It was about the living, about me choosing to rise from his shadow, no matter how dark it had been. The weeks that followed felt like walking through two worlds at once. On one side, there was the freedom, the kind that tasted strange and new after years of silence. I spent hours with Daniel, my real father, piecing together fragments of the life we had both been robbed of. He showed me photographs of the tree he planted the year I was born, now taller than his house. He told me stories of the songs he once wrote, the letters he sent that never reached me, the way he used to sit at the edge of town just to catch a glimpse of me walking to school. Every word was a balm on wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. But on the other side, there was the backlash. Not everyone in town celebrated my decision to reveal my father's sins. Old allies of his men who had prospered from his corruption began whispering that I was ungrateful, that I had no right to tarnish his memory. Some even spat at my feet in the street. My sister Isabel was the worst of all. She stormed into the house one evening, her eyes blazing. "You've destroyed everything," she screamed. "Do you even realize what you've done? Father built this ranch, this family's name, and you're dragging it all through the mud?" Her words cut, but not because I believed them. They hurt because I recognized the fear behind them. The fear of losing the illusion, the fear of admitting the man who had loved her had hated me. She clung to him like a shield because if she admitted the truth, she'd have to face the fact that he wasn't a hero. He was a monster. I tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She slammed the door on her way out, leaving me trembling with anger and sorrow. Losing her, even temporarily, felt like losing another piece of family. But I reminded myself, blood is not always love. Love is not always blood. Daniel stayed, slowly becoming a fixture in our lives. My mother seemed to breathe easier with him near, though guilt lingered in her eyes whenever she looked at me. One night, I finally asked her why she told me the truth only after my father's death. She lowered her gaze, her voice breaking. "Because I was afraid. Afraid he'd kill me. Afraid he'd take you away. Afraid of everything he controlled. I thought I was protecting you. I see now I was only protecting my fear." I didn't forgive her instantly, it's not that easy. But I did understand. Living with my father had been like living with a wolf. You never knew when he would strike. So you learned to be silent, to shrink to survive. She had been a prisoner too. One evening, as Daniel and I walked along the edge of the ranch, I asked him why he had come back after so many years. He stopped, looked out at the fields glowing in the sunset, and said, "Because you spoke. You broke his silence. And I knew then you weren't his anymore. You were finally free to be mine if you'd have me." I don't think I'd ever cried harder. Not because I felt broken, but because I felt whole for the first time. But healing isn't clean. It's jagged, uneven, with nights when I woke sweating from dreams of my father's cold stare, his hand gripping my shoulder, reminding me I was his prisoner. Some wounds will never fade completely. But I had learned that wounds don't define you. What you do with them does. So I chose. I chose to rebuild what he had broken. To forgive debts where I could, to return land that was stolen, to stand tall in a town that once looked at me with suspicion and fear. Not everyone welcomed it. Some saw me as trying to rewrite history, but others, families who had lost everything, began to see me as something else, proof that his cruelty didn't win. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of his shadow lifting. Not gone, not forgotten, but no longer mine to carry. Type continued to receive the next part. In time, the house itself began to change. It had always been suffocating, every room heavy with his presence, the walls echoing with unspoken rules. But as the months passed, I opened the windows, let the light in, stripped away the old portraits that showed him stiff and grim, as if daring us to forget who ruled here. I replaced them with photographs of things that felt alive, sunsets over the pasture, my mother laughing for the first time in years, Daniel standing awkwardly in front of that tree he planted long ago. Each small change felt like an exorcism chasing out the darkness he had left behind. Still, healing didn't mean forgetting. I visited his grave once more, though part of me wished I never would. The cemetery was quiet. The stone newly carved with words I hadn't chosen, asterisk, beloved father, husband, friend. Lies etched in granite, a monument to the image he wanted the world to believe. I stood there with the letters in my bag, the ledger locked away back at the house, and for a long time, I just stared. I thought about confronting him, about saying aloud all the things I had carried for so long. How he stole my childhood, how he smothered my mother, how he erased Daniel from my life and branded me with silence and shame. But as the wind rustled the grass around me, I realized something: he no longer had power here. Not over me, not over my mother, not over the man who had loved me despite everything. He was gone, dust and bones. I didn't need to scream at him to take my power back. I had already taken it. So instead, I spoke softly, almost like a prayer, but not for him, for myself. You don't win, not anymore. You can keep your grave, your lies, your shadow. I'll take the rest. The light, the truth, the love you tried to bury. That's mine now. When I walked away from his grave, I didn't look back. Life moved on, uneven and messy, but real. My sister kept her distance, though I hoped one day she'd face the truth without hating me for it. The town was still divided, but I no longer felt crushed by their stares. Some stopped me on the street to thank me for speaking up, for breaking the silence. Others muttered that I was ungrateful, but their words slid off me now. I had lived under worse. The greatest change was in my mother. Freed from his grip, she began to live in small ways, tending the garden she had abandoned, listening to music he once forbade, laughing with Daniel like a girl half her age. Watching her reclaim pieces of herself was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. It reminded me that survival isn't the same as living. She had survived him. Now finally she was living. And me, I learned that revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's as quiet as telling the truth. Sometimes it's planting new roots where someone else tried to salt the earth. My father's legacy will always be stained, but it doesn't belong to me anymore. I chose to build my own out of honesty, love, and the resilience he never managed to crush. So if there's anything I've taken from this journey, it's this: secrets rot in the dark, but the truth, no matter how painful, sets you free. And freedom, once you taste it, is worth everything. If my story has reached you, if you've ever carried wounds that weren't your fault, know this: your silence doesn't have to be the end. You can speak, you can choose differently, and you can live a life that isn't defined by someone else's cruelty. Thank you for walking through this with me. If this story touched you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep building these truths together. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you know.